There is a letter. It was written to you, not by a stranger, not by a poet who did not know your name. It was written by the one person who has watched every moment of your life without flinching, without looking away, without pretending that things were better than they were. It was written by you, the version of you that exists 30 years from now, sitting in a chair that is either a throne or a rocking chair of regret. And that version of you picked up a pen and wrote these words before you were ready to receive them. The letter begins like this: You had everything. I want you to understand that when I write those words, I am not exaggerating, and I am not trying to wound you. I am simply stating the law as it operates. You had everything. You had the mind that could have moved mountains. You had the time, the very same hours that Edison used to illuminate the world, the same hours that Carnegie used to build an empire that changed the direction of civilization, the same hours that Lincoln used to save a nation that was tearing itself apart at the seams. You had those hours. You had them every single morning. And what did you do with the first one? I know what you did. I watched you do it. You lay there in the darkness between sleeping and waking, in that sacred hour when the subconscious mind is most receptive, when the door between the visible and the invisible stands open the widest. And instead of walking through that door with purpose and intention and a definite chief aim burning in your chest, you reached for distraction. You reached for noise. You reached for anything that would prevent you from sitting alone with the enormous, uncomfortable truth of what you were capable of and had not yet become. That is the letter. That is the first paragraph of it. And if you felt something move in your chest just now, if something tightened in your throat or quickened in your heartbeat, that is not coincidence. That is recognition. That is the deepest part of you, the part that has been waiting patiently behind the curtain of your daily habits, stepping forward to say, yes, that is the truth. That is precisely the truth. And I have been trying to tell you this for years. The version of you reading these words right now exists at a crossroads that appears ordinary. It appears to be just another morning, just another beginning of just another day that will look very much like the day before it. But I have learned in 50 years of studying the architecture of human achievement and human failure that every crossroads appears ordinary until the decision made at it reveals itself to be extraordinary. The morning you begin this one practice, the morning you commit yourself fully and without reservation to this single discipline, will look to outside observers exactly like every other morning. The sun will rise, the coffee will brew, the world will continue its motion. But inside you, something will have shifted, something tectonic, something that cannot be undone. And 30 years from now, the version of you sitting in that chair, writing that letter, will mark this morning as the morning everything changed. Not tomorrow, not when the conditions are better, not when you feel more ready. This morning, this one. This is the letter from your future self, and it arrived exactly on time. Listen now, because what I am about to teach you is not opinion. It is not philosophy in the casual sense of the word. It is law. It is the same law that governs the growth of the oak from the acorn, the same law that governs the movement of planets in their courses, the same law that Carnegie understood when he built his steel empire, and Ford understood when he put the world on wheels, and Edison understood when he refused, across 10,000 failures, to accept that the light could not be made to burn. This law operates without exception. It operates upon the faithful and the doubting alike. It operates upon the man who knows its name and the man who has never heard it spoken. It does not require your belief to function. It only requires your participation. And the terrible truth is this: you have been participating in it all your life, only you have been participating on the wrong side. The condition of the average mind at this precise moment in history is a condition that would have horrified the great thinkers and the great builders of the last century. Not because the average man lacks intelligence, he does not. The intelligence is there. It has always been there. Every soul that comes into this world arrives carrying within it the seeds of greatness, the capacity for infinite expansion, the raw material from which empires of the spirit and of the material world can be constructed. This is not poetry. This is observable fact. I observed it in Carnegie's office and in Edison's laboratory, and in the homes of men who began with nothing more than a burning idea and ended with fortunes that reshaped the world. The raw material was always the same. The human mind in its native state is a miracle of organized energy, capable of directing the forces of the universe toward any end it chooses to pursue with sufficient intensity and persistence. But the average mind has been trained. It has been shaped and molded and conditioned not toward its highest possibility, but toward a carefully defined limitation that society finds comfortable and manageable. From the earliest age, the average man is taught what is possible and what is not possible. He is taught the ceiling. He is taught the boundaries. He is taught that the extraordinary is for other people, different people, luckier people, born with it people, and that the most sensible and admirable course for himself is to find a safe road and travel it without deviation until he arrives decades later at a destination he never consciously chose. This is the condition I am describing, not stupidity, not laziness in its crude form, something far more subtle and far more dangerous. It is the condition of the man who has accepted the dimensions of a small room as the dimensions of the entire universe. He moves around inside that room with great efficiency. He organizes its furniture well. He maintains its walls with diligence, but he has forgotten, or perhaps was never clearly told, that the walls themselves are not real, that the room exists only because he has agreed to see it, that beyond those walls in every direction stretches an infinite field of possibility that has been waiting for him since the first morning he drew breath. Andrew Carnegie sat across from me in the early years of our acquaintance and said something that I have never forgotten, and that I have spent the better part of my life attempting to teach the world. He said, "Hill, the difference between the man who succeeds and the man who fails is not talent, and it is not circumstance, and it is not even effort as most men understand that word. It is thought. The quality, the direction, the persistence, and the emotional intensity of a man's habitual thought determines with mathematical precision the quality, the direction, the persistence, and the emotional intensity of his circumstances. Every condition of your life is the physical echo of a thought you have held. The echo is always faithful. The echo never lies. If you want to change the echo, you must first change the sound. That is the law of thought as the first cause of all conditions. It is not a poetic idea. It is the foundational principle of everything that I teach and everything that history confirms when you examine it without the distortion of sentiment or the laziness of conventional explanation. Thomas Edison did not illuminate the world because he was a genius in the inherited sense. His formal schooling lasted precisely 3 months. 3 months. The institutions that were designed to identify and cultivate genius sent him away and declared him unteachable. What Edison possessed was not inherited intellectual brilliance. It was the capacity to hold a definite thought with such consistency and such emotional intensity that the subconscious mind, receiving that thought day after day and night after night, mobilized every resource of infinite intelligence in service of its realization. He held the thought of light. He held it against 10,000 demonstrations that the thought was wrong. And the thought, because it was held with faith and persistence, eventually translated itself into the physical form of a burning filament that changed the face of civilization. Henry Ford was told by engineers with formal credentials and established reputations that the engine he envisioned could not be built. It was mechanically impossible. It violated understood principles. It could not be done. Ford listened to their objections with the patience of a man who is receiving confirmation of nothing important. And then he did what the great men always do. He went back to the thought. He held the thought. He directed the thought with the precision of a man who understands that thought is not decoration, but construction. That thought is not wishful dreaming, but the actual mechanism of creation. And he held it until the engine appeared. Not because he forced reality to bend by sheer willfulness, but because he understood at a cellular level that the thought held with clarity and faith always precedes its physical equivalent. Always, without exception. This is law. The distinction I must drive into the deepest channel of your understanding right now, before we go one step further, is the distinction between wishing and deciding. It is the most expensive confusion in human history. More dreams have been buried in that confusion than in all the graveyards of all the cities of the world. More potential has been dissolved by that confusion than by all the legitimate obstacles the universe has ever placed in the path of a striving man. Wishing is a passive act. It is the act of observing a desired condition and feeling a mild, pleasant longing in its direction while continuing to move in the opposite direction with all the momentum of established habit. The man who wishes to be wealthy continues to make the same financial decisions he has always made. The man who wishes to be healthy continues to eat and rest and move as he has always done. The man who wishes for a great love continues to wear the armor of self-protection that he assembled during old wounds and never removed. Wishing costs nothing. It changes nothing. It is the conversation a man has with himself to create the sensation of forward motion while remaining perfectly stationary. Deciding is a different creature entirely. Deciding is not a thought, it is an event. It is the moment when a man cuts off every possible retreat, when he burns, as the Aztec warriors burned the boats on the shore, every vessel that would allow him to return to what he was before. Carnegie decided. Edison decided. Lincoln, sitting alone in the darkness of his worst defeats, each loss more crushing than the one before it, decided. Barnes decided. Edwin C. Barnes arrived at Edison's laboratory in New Jersey with nothing, with no money and no reputation and no experience in the electrical business, and he announced that he intended to become Edison's business partner. He was laughed at. He was put to work sweeping floors and performing menial tasks beneath his declared ambition. And for 5 years he swept floors and performed those tasks with the mind of a man who had decided and not merely wished, a man who was in the lobby of his destiny rather than in its distant dreaming distance. And when the moment of opportunity arrived, wrapped as opportunity always is in the disguise of something ordinary, Barnes recognized it and seized it because his mind had been shaped by 5 years of decided focus to see exactly that and nothing else. He became Edison's partner. He built a fortune, not because he was lucky, because he decided. The question I am placing before you with the full authority of 50 years of observation of the greatest achievers this nation has ever produced is this. Have you decided? Not have you wished. Not have you occasionally felt a pleasant longing in the direction of your greater possibility. Have you decided? Have you drawn that line? Have you burned those boats? And if you have not, I want you to understand with clarity and without cruelty that this is not a moral failure. It is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence that no one ever taught you the law. No one ever sat you down and explained with scientific precision what the act of deciding actually does to the architecture of the human mind, what it does to the subconscious, what channels it opens, what forces it mobilizes. No one ever showed you the mechanism. Today I am showing you the mechanism. Say these words aloud right now. Do not read them. Speak them. Feel them move from your lips into the air and back into your ears. That return journey is the mechanism of autosuggestion. The subconscious receives what the voice declares with emotion. So declare with everything in you, I have decided, not wished, not hoped, not considered the possibility, decided. I have a definite chief aim, one burning, specific, precisely defined aim toward which every morning of my life is now directed. I know what I want. I know why I want it. I know the date by which I intend to possess it. I know the price I am prepared to pay in service, in persistence, in the daily renewal of my commitment. My subconscious mind receives this declaration now, in this moment, with full emotional force. I do not ask the universe for permission. I give the universe instruction. The instruction is clear. The instruction is specific. The instruction is backed by the faith of a man who has studied the law and trusts its operation. I have decided. It is done. The work of the visible world is now simply the catching up to what has already been established in the invisible world of thought. I do not waver. I do not doubt. I do not retreat. I have decided. And the law that governs all things shall carry me to my destination, as certainly as it carried Edison, as certainly as it carried Carnegie, as certainly as it has carried every man and every woman who has ever dared to hold one burning thought with absolute conviction until it clothed itself in physical form. Now let those words settle into the deepest part of your mind. Do not argue with them. Do not question them. The subconscious does not require your logical approval. It requires your emotional repetition. Give it that, and it will build what you have commanded. Now I must speak to you about faith, because faith is the most misunderstood word in the vocabulary of achievement, and it has been made misunderstood deliberately, I suspect, by those forces in human society that benefit from the average man's limitation. Faith has been assigned to the realm of the spiritual and the supernatural in a way that disconnects it from the practical business of building a life, as though faith were a possession of churches and prayer rooms and had nothing to do with laboratories and boardrooms and the daily work of a man who intends to leave his mark on the world. This is a catastrophic error. Faith is not a feeling that descends upon the chosen. Faith is a mental state that is induced by the deliberate repetition of thought backed by emotion. Faith is manufactured. It is manufactured the way steel is manufactured, through the application of intense heat to the right raw materials in a process that can be precisely described, reliably repeated, and scientifically understood. The process is called autosuggestion. Autosuggestion is the agency of communication between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. The conscious mind is the gatekeeper. It is the logical, evaluating, skeptical faculty that measures incoming information against existing knowledge and experience and decides on the basis of that comparison whether to accept it or reject it. The subconscious mind has no such gatekeeper. It accepts without argument whatever the conscious mind passes to it with sufficient repetition and emotional force. It does not distinguish between the instruction that serves you and the instruction that destroys you. It does not judge the merit of what it receives. It receives and it builds. This is the law of the subconscious mind. It is building right now, in this moment, from the material you have been feeding it for years. The question is only what that material has been. The man who has spent 20 years feeding his subconscious mind the thought that he is not worthy, that opportunity belongs to other men, that the great life is beyond his reach, that the circumstances of his birth or his history or his failures disqualify him from the table where the great prizes are distributed, that man has been obeying the law as faithfully as any millionaire. He has been using autosuggestion with perfect consistency. He has been building with his subconscious every day. He has simply been building a prison rather than a palace, and he has been doing so because no one ever showed him that the choice between the two was entirely and always in his own hands. The practice of autosuggestion as a method of manufacturing faith is this. You must define your definite chief aim with absolute precision. Not a vague desire, but a specific statement of exactly what you intend to possess, accomplish, or become. You must write this statement. You must write it in the present tense as though it already exists, because for the subconscious mind, the present tense is the only tense that carries instruction weight. Then you must read this statement aloud, morning and night, with every drop of emotional intensity you can summon. You must feel it as you read it. You must see it as you feel it. The emotion is the current that carries the thought past the skeptical gatekeeper of the conscious mind and into the subconscious where it is received and acted upon. Without the emotion, the words are only ink on paper. With the emotion, they become commands to the most powerful building force in the known universe. This is the one thing. This is the morning practice. This is what you do first before the noise of the world begins its assault on your attention and your conviction. Before the demands of the day organize themselves around your limitations. Before the world has a chance to tell you who you are and what is possible, you tell yourself. You speak to your own subconscious mind with the authority of a man who has studied the law and knows beyond any doubt that it will respond. You do this for 30 days, not 29, 30. And at the end of those 30 days, the man looking back at you from the mirror will not be the man who began. Not because something magical happened to the external world, but because something lawful and precise and irreversible happened to the internal world that the external world mirrors with perfect fidelity. I have described to you the mechanism. Now let me describe to you the builder. The subconscious mind is not a metaphor. It is not a poetic way of referring to something vague and indefinable. It is a real faculty of the human organism that operates continuously, without pause, without rest, 24 hours of every day of your life. It does not sleep when you sleep. In fact, the hours of your sleep are among its most productive hours, because during sleep, the conscious mind, with all its interference and skepticism and logical interruption, withdraws from the field, and the subconscious is free to work with the materials you have given it without obstruction. This is why what you feed your mind in the last hour before sleep is among the most important investments you make in any day. The The subconscious will spend the night building from whatever you placed in its hands at the day's closing. If you gave it fear, it will build fear structures. If you gave it doubt, it will build doubt structures. If you gave it a burning, precisely defined, emotionally charged vision of your definite chief aim, it will spend the night building the pathways, the connections, the intuitions, the plans, the opportunities, the relationships, all the 10,000 visible mechanisms through which that invisible vision will eventually clothe itself in physical form. Carnegie knew this. He told me once, early in our conversations when I was still young enough to be surprised by the simplicity of the great laws, that the difference between the man who accumulates wealth and the man who merely survives is not found in the daylight hours. It is found in the hours of darkness. Not because the wealthy man plots and schemes while others rest, but because the wealthy man has trained his subconscious to continue building in his absence, while the ordinary man has given his subconscious nothing but the residue of anxiety and resentment and formless worry to work with through the night. The wealthy man wakes with ideas. He wakes with clarity. He wakes with a precision of purpose that the ordinary man mistakes for natural genius and explains away as luck and never recognizes as the lawful product of a disciplined relationship between a man and his own subconscious mind. The subconscious mind accepts both fear and faith without judgment and builds accordingly. This is a sentence you must hold in your mind like a flame. It accepts both. There is no preference. There is no moral weighting. There is only reception and construction. The man who lies awake rehearsing his fears, running the film of his worst-case scenarios through his mind in the darkness, reviewing each possible disaster with the focused attention that should be directed toward his definite chief aim. That man is feeding his subconscious with the same diligence as the man who rehearses his victories. Both will receive what they have ordered. Both will wake in a world that confirms what they have built. This is not punishment, it is law, and law operates without sentiment. Now I must speak to you about the enemies. Not the enemies that exist outside you in the form of circumstances and competitors and difficult conditions. Those are manageable. Those are, in fact, the very resistances against which greatness sharpens itself. And the man who eliminates all external resistance eliminates the mechanism of his own development. The enemies I speak of are internal. They are the 6 ghosts of fear that Carnegie first named for me in our conversations, and that I have spent decades identifying and dismantling in the lives of the men and women who have applied these principles. These ghosts are not dramatic. They are not identifiable by their appearance. They disguise themselves as wisdom, as caution, as common sense, as the reasonable voice of experience, and in those disguises they are more dangerous than any external enemy, because they carry the voice of your own mind, and you cannot easily distinguish them from legitimate thought. The first ghost is the fear of poverty. It is the most common and the most destructive because it operates in a dimension that is fundamental to survival, and it therefore has the easiest access to the attention and emotion of any man, regardless of his circumstances. The fear of poverty does not live only in the minds of the poor. It lives with equal force in the minds of men who have accumulated substantial wealth and who lie awake at night terrified of its loss. The fear of poverty is not, at its root, about money. It is about adequacy. It is the deep whisper that says you are not enough, that what you have is always about to be taken, that security is an illusion, that you are one misfortune away from the worst possible condition. This fear paralyzes the thought. It makes the mind contract rather than expand. It creates the very conditions it most dreads, because the subconscious, receiving the thought of poverty with sufficient emotion and repetition, builds toward poverty with the same reliable machinery it would use to build toward abundance. The man who fears poverty thinks in terms of losing rather than gaining, in terms of protecting rather than creating, in terms of limitation rather than expansion, and his outer world becomes the faithful mirror of that inner world with a reliability that is heartbreaking in its precision. The disguise this ghost wears is prudence. It calls itself careful planning. It calls itself responsible thinking. It says, I am simply being realistic, and in saying this, it ensures that the man never rises above the reality it has defined for him. The law that destroys this ghost is the law of definiteness of purpose, combined with the law of the extra mile. The man who fixes his mind upon a definite chief aim of wealth, who gives more service than he is currently paid for, who believes with the certainty of a man who has examined the evidence that the law of compensation is as reliable as the law of gravity. That man has armed himself against the fear of poverty at the deepest level, because he understands that poverty is not a condition that is imposed upon him. It is a condition that is built by the thoughts and habits he chooses to maintain or to change. Speak this declaration now. The fear of poverty has no jurisdiction over my mind. I have replaced it with the certainty of abundance built by definite purpose and faithful action, and this replacement is permanent. The second ghost is the fear of criticism. It is, in my observation, the most universally destructive of the six, because it attacks the engine of all achievement before the engine can be started. It does not wait until you have built something to tear it down. It destroys the blueprint before the first stone is laid. The fear of criticism operates through the question of what others will think, and it is particularly cruel in its operation because it enlists the opinions of people who will never be affected by your success or failure as the primary supervisors of your most important decisions. The man who fears criticism adjusts his ambitions downward to avoid the exposure of aiming high. He speaks in qualifications. He commits to nothing fully so that he can never be accused of failing fully. He watches other men take the field and says, "I could do that if I chose to." Not because he believes this, but because it preserves the illusion of capability without requiring the risk of demonstration. Who gave you this fear? A teacher who laughed at an answer you gave in a classroom when you were 9 years old. A parent whose own fear of failure was transmitted to you as cautionary wisdom. A group of peers who established, in the brutal social laboratory of adolescence, that differentness was dangerous. These are the architects of a fear that has been running your life from behind the curtain and calling itself wisdom. And every day you allow it to continue in that role, every day you make a smaller choice than you are capable of making because of what someone might think. You are paying it rent with the currency of your unrealized potential. The law that destroys this ghost is the law of persistent definiteness. The man who decides on a definite chief aim and pursues it with the energy of total commitment discovers that the opinions of bystanders become irrelevant with the same speed that his forward motion renders them unable to keep up. Edison was criticized. Carnegie was criticized. Lincoln was the most criticized man of his generation, attacked in the press with a ferocity that would destroy most men's capacity for public service. And he held his purpose with the steadiness of a man who understood that history is written not by the critics, but by the doers. The fear of criticism dissolves when a man chooses his own judgment as the primary authority over his life and ceases to sublease that authority to people who have not invested one moment in the construction of his dream. Speak this declaration now. The fear of criticism is dissolved. I am governed by my own decided purpose and by the laws of the universe, not by the opinions of those who have not seen what I have seen about my own potential. The third ghost is the fear of ill health. This ghost is cunning because it has access to the body as well as the mind. It produces, through the mechanism of hypochondria and through the more general mechanism of psychosomatic response, the very conditions it claims to fear. The man who lives in the fear of ill health creates, through the sustained negative suggestion to his own subconscious, precisely the susceptibility to illness he most dreads. The mind and the body are not separate systems. They are continuous systems, and what the mind declares the body tends to demonstrate. The men of great achievement whom I studied were not men who lived in the shadow of physical fear. They directed their attention toward health as a state of positive expectation rather than toward illness as a state of negative anticipation, and their bodies responded to the direction of their thought with the same faithfulness that any subconscious system responds to habitual suggestion. Speak this declaration now. My body is directed by the same intelligent force that directs the stars. I declare my health. I expect my vitality. I build both through the positive direction of my thought. The fourth ghost is the fear of the loss of love. It is the ghost that prevents the deepest commitments, the ghost that holds the heart at a calculated distance from every relationship that matters, the ghost that says, protect yourself, that says the loss is coming and you should make yourself ready for it before it arrives by never fully arriving yourself. The man who fears the loss of love loses it through the machinery of his fear before it has a chance to be lost through any natural process. He withdraws. He withholds. He maintains an exit strategy in every relationship, as though love were a burning building he might need to flee at any moment, rather than the foundation upon which the greatest human structures are built. The law that destroys this ghost is the law of giving, which states that the surest way to possess love is to give it without calculation, without insurance, without the hedge of self-protection, and to trust the law of increase to return it multiplied. Speak this declaration now. I love without calculation and without reservation. The law of increase governs all that I give freely, and I give love as freely as the sun gives light. The fifth ghost is the fear of old age. It operates insidiously because it takes a reality, the passage of time, and transforms it from a neutral fact into a source of mounting anxiety that poisons the present moment with the dread of a future condition. The man who fears old age cannot be fully present in his youth or his middle age because he is always conducting a grief rehearsal for what he imagines he will lose. He depreciates his own value in advance. He begins the withdrawal from life before life has given him any legitimate reason to withdraw. I have observed men of 60 and 70 who had shed this ghost entirely and who burned with a vitality and a purposefulness that shamed men 30 years younger who were already surrendering to the fear of time's passage. The law that destroys this fear is the understanding that the man with a definite chief aim has no meaningful relationship with aging because his attention is directed entirely toward the forward construction of his vision, and the past is simply the raw material from which wisdom is extracted. Speak this declaration now. Time is my ally. Every year I accumulate is an accumulation of wisdom and experience and strength directed toward my definite purpose. I do not fear the passage of time, I use it. The sixth ghost is the fear of death. It is the deepest and in some ways the simplest because its resolution is purely philosophical and available to any man willing to examine it without the distortion of the conditioning he has received. The man who fears death cannot live fully because he is holding a portion of his energy in perpetual reserve against the moment of ultimate loss. He cannot throw himself completely into the great work because somewhere in his calculation there is always the subtracted portion that belongs to dread. The law that destroys this ghost is the understanding, born of long observation and confirmed by the testimony of every great spiritual and philosophical tradition that humanity has produced, that the intelligence within a man, the consciousness, the infinite intelligence that expresses itself through the individual mind, is not a product of the physical body that can be destroyed with the body's dissolution. Carnegie said to me near the end of his life that the only preparation worth making for death was the building of a life so full and so purposeful and so given in service to others that the question of its end was overshadowed at every moment by the magnificence of its continuation. Speak this declaration now. I am animated by an intelligence that is larger than my body and older than my fears. I live fully. I give completely. I build without the shadow of dread. Say these words aloud right now. Do not read them, speak them. Feel them move from your lips into the air and back into your ears. That return journey is the mechanism of autosuggestion. The subconscious receives what the voice declares with emotion. So declare with everything in you. The six ghosts are dissolved. They held no real authority. They were constructed from old pain and borrowed fear, and I have examined each of them and found them empty of genuine power. I am not afraid of poverty because I am building abundance through definite purpose and faithful daily action. I am not afraid of criticism because my life is governed by my own decided vision and not by the commentary of those who stand outside it. I am not afraid of ill health because my mind directs my body with positive expectation and faith in the intelligence that governs all living things. I am not afraid of the loss of love because I give love freely, and the law of increase governs all that is freely given. I am not afraid of old age because time is my ally, and every year deposits wisdom and strength in the account of my definite chief aim. I am not afraid of death because I am the expression of a consciousness that is not subject to the limitations of the physical world. I am free. The ghosts are dissolved. The field is clear. I move forward now with every faculty fully available and fully directed toward the single, burning, definite aim that has been decided and declared and is now being built by the faithful machinery of my subconscious mind. Now let those words settle into the deepest part of your mind. Do not argue with them. Do not question them. The subconscious does not require your logical approval. It requires your emotional repetition. Give it that, and it will build what you have commanded. Now I must speak to you about the mastermind. No man has ever risen to great achievement alone. I want to repeat that with the force it deserves. No man. In all of recorded history, in all the cases that I examined and studied across 50 years of research into the architecture of great achievement, no man has ever risen to great achievement alone. This is not a sentimental observation about the value of friendship. It is a scientific statement about the nature of mental energy and the law by which it multiplies when properly combined. Two minds working in perfect harmony toward a definite shared purpose do not produce twice the intellectual power that one mind would produce. They produce something qualitatively different, a third mind, an invisible intelligence that emerges from the harmony between them and that has access to resources and insights and creative energies that neither individual mind could access independently. This is the mastermind principle, and it is among the most powerful of all the laws I have studied. Carnegie understood this at the deepest level. When I asked him, in one of our early conversations, to what single cause he attributed his enormous success, he did not hesitate. He said it was his mastermind, not his own intelligence, not his personal industry, his mastermind, the group of men he had assembled around himself, each possessing complementary knowledge and different strengths, all working in perfect harmony toward a shared, definite chief aim, all feeding the invisible third mind with their individual contributions. Carnegie said that whenever he faced a problem that exceeded his own individual capacity, he had only to convene his mastermind group and place the problem before them, and the solution would arrive. Sometimes from the least expected direction, sometimes in forms that none of the individual members could have conceived independently. This was not coincidence. This was the law of the mastermind in operation. Ford used it. He surrounded himself with men who knew what he did not know, and he was entirely unashamed of this practice, which was remarkable because the world of his era placed enormous emphasis on the self-made man as an individual who carried all his own knowledge. Ford was not afraid to say, "I do not know this, but I know where to find the man who does." And this attitude, this mastermind consciousness, was itself a manifestation of the definiteness of purpose that directed everything he did. He did not need to be the smartest man in the room. He needed to be the most purposeful man in the room, and in that quality he had no equal. The mastermind that you must form is not necessarily a formal arrangement. It begins with one other mind. One other person who holds a vision compatible with yours, who operates with integrity, who brings strength where you have limitation, and with whom you can enter into a relationship of complete honesty and mutual purpose. This is not the relationship of casual acquaintance. It is not the relationship of people who agree with each other for the pleasure of the agreement. It is the relationship of minds that challenge and inspire and elevate each other in the direction of a shared definite aim. And it is available to every man at every level of his development if he is willing to seek it with the same seriousness with which he would seek any other essential resource. The selection of your mastermind associates must be governed by one principle above all others. They must be people who are moving forward, not people who are satisfied, not people who have accepted the dimensions of the small room, not people who will, in the name of caring for you, confirm your limitations and call it support. Moving forward people, growing people, people who frighten you slightly with the magnitude of what they expect of themselves, because that quality is contagious in the same way that fear is contagious, and you will find that in their company your own expectations expand, your own definiteness sharpens, your own subconscious receives, through the social mechanism of expectation, instructions that lift it above what it would build in isolation. Now I want to speak to you about the law that is, in my view, the most underestimated and the most misunderstood of all the great principles. It is the law of cosmic habit force. Cosmic habit force is the law through which the universe maintains order and consistency through repetition. It is the law that keeps the planets in their courses. It is the law that keeps the seasons in their sequence. It is the law that compels every river to follow its channel and every tree to grow according to its nature. And it is the law that governs your identity, your character, your automatic responses, your default states of being. It is the law that has built you to this precise moment from the accumulated repetition of every thought you have habitually thought, every action you have habitually taken, every emotional state you have habitually inhabited. You are at this moment the physical manifestation of your habitual life. This is not poetry. This is the law of cosmic habit force in its most personal and most immediate application. The critical understanding here is this. Cosmic habit force does not care what the habit is. It does not distinguish between the habit that serves you and the habit that destroys you. It only reinforces whatever is repeated. This is why the man who begins each morning with the conscious practice of autosuggestion and the deliberate declaration of his definite chief aim is using cosmic habit force in his favor. He is consciously directing the law to reinforce the exact pattern of thought and identity that he has decided to inhabit. With each morning's practice, the pattern becomes more deeply grooved. With each day's repetition, the new identity becomes more fully the default. After 30 days, it is no longer effort. After 60 days, it is no longer practice. After 90 days, it is the man himself. The practice has become the practitioner. This is the most important thing I can tell you about the 30-day morning practice. You are not merely doing a thing each morning. You are building a man. You are using the law of cosmic habit force with conscious precision to construct an identity that is capable of achieving the definite chief aim you have declared, because the subconscious mind will not long build toward a destination that conflicts with the identity of its owner. If you try to build wealth while your identity is the identity of a poor man, the subconscious will resolve the contradiction against you every time, because identity is the older and deeper pattern. The morning practice changes the identity first. Then the subconscious builds without contradiction. Then the physical world begins its faithful echoing. Your nights are building your future right now. As you sleep tonight, as you release the conscious mind into the restoration of sleep, your subconscious will continue working. It is always working. The question is only what it is working with. Give it, in the last moments before sleep, the clear, vivid, emotionally charged declaration of your definite chief aim. Give it the image of the life you have decided to build. Give it the feeling of already possessing what you have declared. And then release the effort. Let the machine run. Let the law operate. Wake knowing that something has been built in the night that you will not see for some time, but that is being constructed with perfect reliability by a force that has never once failed to build what it was given to build. Now I must speak to you about the law of the extra mile, because it is the most directly actionable of all the principles and the one that produces the most immediately observable results in a man's material circumstances. The law of the extra mile states that the man who renders more service than he is currently being compensated for, who gives more than is expected, who performs his work at a level that exceeds the defined requirement, invokes the law of compensation with an inevitability that is as reliable as any law of physics. The law of compensation states that economic reward follows the rendering of useful service, and that the size of the reward is in direct proportion to the quality and the quantity and the value of the service rendered. Most men operate on the principle of exact exchange. They give exactly what they are paid for, no more and no less, and they wonder why their compensation never increases beyond its current level. This is the economics of stagnation. The extra mile principle operates on a different logic entirely. It understands that the rendering of service beyond current compensation is not generosity in the charitable sense, but strategic alignment with the law of increase. The man who gives more than he is paid for becomes indispensable. The man who becomes indispensable becomes irreplaceable. The man who becomes irreplaceable commands his own terms. This is not an ideal. This is a law that has been observed operating in the lives of every man of great achievement across every field and every era. Charles M. Schwab did not rise from the steel mills to the leadership of Carnegie Steel and then to the creation of Bethlehem Steel because he was born into advantage. He rendered service so far beyond what was expected of any man at his level that Carnegie could no more ignore him than the sun can ignore the morning. Schwab gave. He gave his full intelligence and his full energy and his full personality to every task, regardless of whether that task was proportional to his ambition. He treated the small work as the training ground for the great work. He understood, perhaps instinctively before he could have articulated the law, that cosmic habit force would take the quality of his service and make it his identity, and that his identity would eventually command compensation proportional to that quality. Say these words aloud right now. Do not read them, speak them. Feel them move from your lips into the air and back into your ears. That return journey is the mechanism of auto-suggestion. The subconscious receives what the voice declares with emotion, so declare with everything in you. I give more than is expected. I render service beyond what is required. I do not give in order to receive in the moment because I understand that the law of compensation operates across time, and that the investment I make today through the extra mile will return to me multiplied beyond any proportion I could predict or calculate. I am not working for my current employer. I am working for the law. I am building the case before the universe for the increase that is coming. I treat every task as the training ground for the great work that my definite chief aim requires. I bring my full intelligence and my full energy and my full attention to everything I do, regardless of its immediate scale or apparent significance. I am building the habit of excellence through cosmic habit force, and excellence has already become my identity. The law of compensation is not a hope, it is a certainty, and I am aligned with it completely. Now let those words settle into the deepest part of your mind. Do not argue with them, do not question them. The subconscious does not require your logical approval. It requires your emotional repetition. Give it that, and it will build what you have commanded. The discipline of controlled attention is the master discipline, because it is the one from which all the other disciplines flow. The man who can hold his thought on one target, one definite chief aim, in the presence of all the distractions and competing demands and urgent irrelevancies that the modern world hurls at his attention with the force of a fire hose, that man has in his possession the fundamental tool of all creation. The man who cannot control his attention is not in possession of himself. He is possessed by his environment. He is carried wherever the strongest current of external stimulus pulls him, and at the end of his day and his month and his year and his life, he looks back at the distance traveled and finds that it bears no meaningful relationship to the destination he intended to reach. He worked hard. He was busy. He moved constantly. But movement is not progress, and activity is not achievement, and the road traveled without controlled attention does not lead to the castle. It leads in circles, and the circles grow smaller as the years accumulate, not because the man becomes less capable, but because the habit of scattered attention, reinforced by cosmic habit force, becomes more deeply grooved with every passing year, until it is the man's most fundamental way of being in the world. What destroys controlled attention in this era? Everything. Every notification on every device in every pocket of every man has been designed by some of the most sophisticated minds in the world specifically to interrupt the flow of attention, to create urgency around the irrelevant, to substitute the sensation of connection for the reality of progress. The man who allows his attention to be governed by these mechanisms has, in effect, subcontracted the management of his subconscious to forces that have no interest in his definite chief aim and every interest in his continued distraction. This is not a metaphor. It is the operating model of an entire industry, and the cost of participation is the only currency that cannot be earned back: time. The practice of controlled attention begins in the morning. Before you engage with anything external, before the messages and the news and the obligations, you direct your attention with full conscious intention to your definite chief aim. You hold it there, you feel it, you see it, you speak it aloud through autosuggestion. You give your subconscious its instructions for the day before the world has a chance to give it different ones. This is the foundational act of controlled attention. Everything else in the practice of this discipline builds on this first act. The man who does this consistently for 30 days will find, at the end of those 30 days, that his attention is easier to direct, that his focus is cleaner, that the competing distractions have less gravitational pull on his mind, not because the world has become less distracting, but because his subconscious has been trained to return habitually to its appointed channel. Rockefeller understood controlled attention better than almost any man I have studied. He had an extraordinary capacity to isolate a definite line of thought and hold it against every competing consideration until it had yielded every drop of its potential. This was not genius of the intuitive kind. It was discipline, trained, practiced, deliberately cultivated discipline applied to the faculty of attention with the same systematic precision that he applied to every other aspect of his business. The result was a mind that could see opportunity where others saw complexity, that could penetrate to the essential issue in any situation while others were still sorting through the peripheral considerations. This capacity was built. It was built the way any capacity is built, through the repetition of the desired behavior over sufficient time for cosmic habit force to make it automatic. Now let me speak to you about the transmutation of desire, because this is the law by which the invisible becomes visible, by which the energy of burning want is converted into the physical currency of achievement. Transmutation is the scientific term for the conversion of one form of energy into another, and what I am describing when I speak of the transmutation of desire is precisely that. The conversion of emotional energy, the raw, burning force of a defined desire held with faith and persistence, into its physical equivalent in the form of wealth, or health, or influence, or whatever the definite chief aim has specified. This conversion is not instantaneous. I want to be honest with you about this because the men who have sold you shortcuts have done you a tremendous disservice. This conversion follows a timetable that is governed by the depth of the desire, the consistency of the faith, the quality of the organized plan, and the persistence of the effort. But what I can tell you with the certainty of a man who has watched this law operate in the lives of hundreds of men is that the conversion always happens. Always. The law does not fail. The law cannot fail. It is as incapable of failure as the law of gravity is incapable of deciding on a given morning not to function. When the conditions are met, the conversion happens. The desire transmutes. The invisible clothes itself in the visible. The thought becomes the thing. The conditions are five. First, a definite chief aim specified in exact and measurable terms. Second, a burning desire, not a polite interest, but a consuming obsession of the constructive kind, the kind that renders all other options unacceptable. Third, faith, manufactured through autosuggestion and maintained through the deliberate refusal to entertain doubt as a permanent state. Fourth, an organized, definite plan of action, however imperfect in its early form, because the plan will be refined by the intelligence mobilized in its service, and the important thing is to begin. Fifth, persistence, the decision to continue regardless of temporary defeat, because the law of the universe does not grant its greatest prizes to the first attempt, but to the consistent, sustained insistence of the man who understands that temporary defeat is never permanent failure, unless the man chooses to make it so. These five conditions met and maintained produce transmutation. The burning desire moves through the alembic of faith and organized planning and persistent action and emerges on the other side as the physical equivalent of what was desired. This is the law. This is what Carnegie meant. This is what Edison demonstrated across 10,000 unsuccessful attempts. This is what Lincoln proved through 16 years of public defeat before the presidency. This is what every man and woman who has ever moved from nothing to something has done, whether they called it by this name or not, whether they understood the mechanism or only felt its operation in the unmistakable force of their own forward movement. Say these words aloud right now. Do not read them. Speak them. Feel them move from your lips into the air and back into your ears. That return journey is the mechanism of autosuggestion. The subconscious receives what the voice declares with emotion. So declare with everything in you, my desire is transmuting. The burning energy of my definite chief aim is converting itself right now, through the faithful operation of the law, into its physical equivalent. I do not force this process, I cooperate with it. I meet the five conditions faithfully. I specify my aim with precision. I hold my desire with a burning intensity that makes all other options unacceptable. I manufacture my faith through daily autosuggestion, and I refuse to allow doubt to take permanent residence in my mind. I have a plan. The plan is not perfect, but it is definite, and it is in motion, and the intelligence mobilized by my burning desire will refine it as it moves forward. I persist. I persist through temporary defeat without mistaking it for permanent failure. I persist through the confusion that precedes clarity, through the effort that precedes ease, through the invisibility of the process that precedes the visibility of the result. The transmutation is happening. The law is working. The invisible is becoming visible. I cooperate fully and I do not flinch. Now let those words settle into the deepest part of your mind. Do not argue with them. Do not question them. The subconscious does not require your logical approval. It requires your emotional repetition. Give it that, and it will build what you have commanded. Before I speak to you about the silent harvest, I must bring you deeper into the law of transmutation and its relationship to the organized plan, because this connection is where most men who understand the desire and the faith and the persistence still fail. They have the fire, they have the faith, but they have no plan, or they have a plan that is a wish dressed in the language of strategy. And the law cannot build from a wish any more than a carpenter can build a house from the idea of lumber. You must have the plan. And more than having the plan, you must be willing to work the plan when every external signal is telling you the plan is wrong. The organized plan begins with a clear statement of what you intend to give in exchange for what you intend to receive. This is a point that most teachers of achievement neglect because it requires a kind of honesty that is uncomfortable. The universe does not give something for nothing. The law of compensation is precise and it is relentless. Nothing of value arrives in a man's life except in exchange for something of value given. The man who expects wealth without the rendering of proportional service is asking the law to violate its own nature, and the law will not do this for any man regardless of the attractiveness or the earnestness of his expectation. Carnegie gave service on a scale that changed the industrial capacity of the nation. Edison gave service in the form of inventions that reshaped the daily life of every person on Earth. Ford gave service in the form of mobility that was previously available only to the wealthy, and that he delivered to the working man. What did each of these men receive? Compensation proportional to the scale and the quality of the service they rendered. This is not coincidence. This is the law of compensation operating with perfect mechanical precision. Your organized plan, therefore, begins with the question, what am I prepared to give? Not what am I prepared to work, because work is a vague term that most men use to mean a quantity of effort expended without a corresponding quality of service delivered. I mean, what specific, defined, uniquely valuable service are you prepared to render in exchange for the definite chief aim you have declared? The answer to this question is the foundation of your plan, and when that answer is clear and the service is definite and the rendering is consistent and excellent, the law of compensation has no choice but to return to you its equivalent. John D. Rockefeller's organized plan was built on a profound understanding of systematic organization. Where other men in the oil business saw individual transactions, Rockefeller saw systems. He thought not in terms of single deals, but in terms of the architecture of an entire industry. And he organized his thinking and his planning around that architecture with a precision and a consistency that produced results that appeared to his contemporaries to be the product of supernatural advantage. They were the product of organized thought applied with controlled attention to a definite chief aim. They were the lawful result of a man who understood that the law does not reward scattered effort with large returns, that concentration of thought and concentration of effort and concentration of organized planning around a single definite aim is the condition under which the law produces its most spectacular demonstrations. Your organized plan does not need to be complete before you begin. I want to say this clearly because the perfectionism of the uncommitted mind uses the incompleteness of the plan as the reason for indefinite delay. The plan will never be complete before you begin because the intelligence required to complete it is mobilized by the beginning and not before it. Begin with the plan you have, however imperfect. The law will supply what is missing as the forward motion of committed action creates the conditions under which what is missing can arrive. This is the mechanism of the mastermind in action, the mechanism of infinite intelligence responding to the signal of a man who has decided and is moving, not waiting, not planning the planning, not preparing the preparation, but actually in motion toward his definite chief aim, with every resource currently available to him, and the faith that the resources not yet available will arrive in proportion to the demonstrated seriousness of his commitment. I observed this mechanism operate in the life of Edwin Barnes with a clarity that confirmed everything I had learned from the study of Carnegie and Edison and Ford. Barnes arrived at Edison's laboratory with no money, no experience, and no plan except the burning and specific desire to become Thomas Edison's business partner. He had no organized plan because there was no plan to be organized at that stage, no road that he could trace from where he stood to where he intended to arrive. What he had was the desire at its maximum intensity and the faith that the plan would reveal itself when it was needed. He took the first action available to him, which was to present himself at the laboratory and make his intention known. The rest of the plan arrived over 5 years, in pieces, as the burning desire working through the subconscious mind and through infinite intelligence arranged the circumstances through which the plan could form itself around the available possibilities. The plan, when it finally materialized in the form of the Ediphone opportunity, was perfectly constructed, perfectly timed, and perfectly matched to the capabilities that Barnes had developed through those 5 years of preparation. It appeared to observers to have come from nowhere. It came from the organized action of a mind that had held its definite chief aim with sufficient intensity and faith for long enough that the law could complete the plan on his behalf. Say these words aloud right now. Do not read them. Speak them. Feel them move from your lips into the air and back into your ears. That return journey is the mechanism of autosuggestion. The subconscious receives what the voice declares with emotion. So declare with everything in you, my plan is in motion. It is not perfect, and it does not need to be perfect, because the intelligence that is building it through the operation of infinite intelligence is more capable of perfecting it than my conscious mind could be working alone. I render my service now, with the resources I currently possess, at the highest quality I can currently deliver. I move forward without waiting for all the pieces to be visible, because I understand that the law reveals the path in proportion to the commitment of the walker, and not in advance of it. I give what I have. I give it completely. I give it with the faith that the law of compensation will return it multiplied, and that the multiplication will bring with it the additional resources required for the next stage of the building. My plan is organized around service. My service is organized around my definite chief aim. My definite chief aim is organized around the burning desire that has been planted in me by the same intelligence that planted the oak in the acorn. I trust the plan. I work the plan. The plan is working. Now let those words settle into the deepest part of your mind. Do not argue with them. Do not question them. The subconscious does not require your logical approval. It requires your emotional repetition. Give it that, and it will build what you have commanded. There is another law I must name before we arrive at the silent harvest, and it is a law that most men discover only after they have suffered the consequences of violating it for years. It is the law of accurate thinking. The accurate thinker is not the pessimist and not the optimist in their commonly understood forms. The pessimist looks at evidence and extracts from it the worst possible interpretation and calls this realism. The optimist looks at evidence and ignores the parts of it that require honest reckoning and calls this positive thinking. Both are forms of inaccuracy. Both lead men away from the truth of their situation, and therefore away from the intelligent action that the truth would indicate. The accurate thinker looks at all the evidence, the favorable and the unfavorable alike, with the dispassionate clarity of a scientist examining data, and from that complete and honest picture, he extracts the information that is genuinely relevant to his definite chief aim. He separates the important from the unimportant. He separates the relevant from the irrelevant. He separates the temporary from the permanent, and he acts on the accurate picture rather than on the comfortable distortion. Lincoln was the greatest accurate thinker I have encountered in the historical record. He faced a nation in dissolution, an army in disarray, a cabinet of rivals who believed themselves more capable than he, a press that was systematically hostile, a war that was going badly for years before it turned. He did not pretend these conditions were other than they were. He did not look away from the unfavorable evidence. He looked at it directly, and with complete steadiness, and from it he extracted precisely what was needed: the understanding that the cause was right and therefore ultimately sustainable, that the opponents of the cause were not wrong about everything, and that their insights should be incorporated where they were accurate, that the temporary defeats were not the permanent trajectory, but the necessary cost of finding the path that would eventually lead to victory. He thought accurately. He held his definite chief aim: the preservation of the Union and the end of slavery, through every accurate assessment of how difficult the achievement of that aim was going to be, and the accurate thinking that acknowledged the difficulty simultaneously revealed the path through it. This is the marriage of the accurate thinker and the man of definite purpose, a man who sees clearly and acts faithfully, who is neither blinded by optimism nor paralyzed by pessimism, who uses the complete truth of his situation as the material from which the intelligent plan is built, rather than as the evidence from which excuses are constructed. When you practice accurate thinking alongside your morning declaration of definite chief aim, you become a man who is both inspired by where he is going and clear-eyed about where he is starting from. And that combination, inspiration plus accuracy, is the combination from which the most durable and most remarkable achievements are built. Now I want to speak about something that the great men I studied all understood in their own ways, though they expressed it differently. It is the nature of the relationship between a man and the invisible force that I have called infinite intelligence. Carnegie talked about it in terms of what he called the organized power of the mastermind. Edison talked about it in terms of the experimentation that eventually revealed what nature was always prepared to give if approached correctly. Lincoln talked about it in terms of providence, the sense that something larger than individual will was working through the best efforts of good men toward a purpose that exceeded their individual understanding. Ford talked about it in terms of the universe's willingness to provide when a man was absolutely clear and absolutely committed. I have called this infinite intelligence throughout my work, and I use that term not as a theological claim, but as a practical description of an observable phenomenon: that the man who holds a burning desire backed by faith and expressed through a definite organized plan and persistent action, that man attracts to himself the people, the circumstances, the ideas, the resources, and the opportunities that are precisely what his definite chief aim requires, with a reliability that exceeds any conventional explanation and that can only be accounted for by the operation of an intelligent organizing principle that exceeds individual mental capacity. I have watched it happen too many times, in too many different contexts, with too many different people, to treat it as coincidence. It is law. Call it what you will. The name does not affect the operation. What I can tell you is that the cooperation of this infinite intelligence is available to every man who meets the conditions of its engagement. The conditions are the same as the conditions of the law of transmutation: definiteness of purpose, burning desire, manufactured faith, organized planning, persistence. Meet those conditions, and the organizing intelligence of the universe, whatever its ultimate nature, will work with you. It will not work for the drifter. It will not work for the man who has not decided. It will not work for the man whose desire is lukewarm, and whose faith is theoretical, and whose plan is vague, and whose persistence lasts only until the first significant resistance. But for the man who has decided, who burns, who believes, who plans, who persists, the cooperation is total. The force that runs the universe will work in his behalf, and the evidence of this cooperation will appear in time in the physical world in the form of the achieved definite chief aim. Now I want to speak to you about what I call the silent harvest, because every man who has ever planted anything with real intention knows that there is a long season between the planting and the visible emergence of the crop, and that season is the season of faith and patience and the continuance of the invisible work, even when no visible evidence exists to confirm that the work is producing anything. The men I studied who achieved the greatest things all passed through this season. Edison's long season was 10,000 experiments that produced no light. Carnegie's long season was the years of modest work in the telegraph office before the larger opportunities began to arrive. Lincoln's long season was a sequence of defeats that would have been, by any conventional measure, the biography of a failure. Ford's long season was the years of struggling with the engine that the engineers said could not be built and the investors said was not worth funding. In every case, the invisible work was happening. The subconscious was building. The law was operating. The planted seed was in the dark and doing what seeds do in the dark. And then, apparently suddenly, apparently from nowhere, the emergence came. The light burned. The empire took shape. The presidency arrived. The engine ran. And the world looked at these moments of emergence and called them genius, or luck, or destiny, and completely missed the season of silent and invisible work that made them inevitable. You are in that season now. If you have begun the practice, if you have fixed your definite chief aim, if you have begun the morning declaration through autosuggestion, if you have begun addressing the 6 ghosts with the declarations that dissolve them, if you are beginning to align yourself with the extra mile and controlled attention and the mastermind principle, then you are in the ground. The seed is planted. The invisible work has begun. And the most important thing I can tell you about the silent harvest season is this: do not dig up the seed to check whether it is growing. Do not interrupt the invisible work with the demand for immediate visible evidence. Do not assess the operation of the law by the standard of the last 24 hours or the last 7 days. The law operates on a timetable that is proportional to the size of what is being built. And if what you are building is worthy of you, it will require a season of invisible preparation before it can stand in the visible world. This is where most men stop. Not at the hardest obstacle, not at the most discouraging defeat. They stop in the silence between the planting and the emergence. They stop because the silence feels like nothing happening, and the mind that has been trained by a culture of instant gratification interprets the silence as failure. But the silence is not failure. The silence is construction. The silence is the underground root system extending itself, building the foundation that will hold the enormous visible structure that is coming. Every great thing that has ever been built was built mostly in silence, mostly underground, mostly in the invisible dimension where the law operates without the need for your observation or approval or encouragement. Trust the law. This is the final instruction of the silent harvest season. Trust the law with the same certainty with which you trust the law of gravity. You do not conduct experiments each morning to verify that the law of gravity is still functioning. You trust it, and you move through your day in the full confidence of its reliability. Trust the law of the subconscious mind with the same reliability. Trust the law of cosmic habit force. Trust the law of the extra mile and its inevitable return through the law of compensation. Trust the law of transmutation. They are working. They were working before you knew their names. They will work with far greater precision now that you are cooperating with them consciously. The 30 days are the planting season. What you do each morning for the next 30 days is the act of planting with full consciousness and full intention and full cooperation with the law. What happens after those 30 days, what emerges, what you become, what begins to arrive in the visible world as the echo of what you have built in the invisible world, that is the harvest. And I will tell you, with the confidence of a man who has watched this process operate in hundreds of lives across 5 decades, that the harvest will exceed your current expectation. Not because the law is generous in the sentimental sense, but because the law is precise. And when a man's subconscious is properly aligned with a definite burning desire backed by faith and persistent action, the precision of the law produces results that appear disproportionate to the effort, only because the effort was made in the invisible dimension, where it is not easily measured or observed. The man you are becoming is already existing in the invisible dimension. He is already there in the realm of thought and faith and declared intention. What the next 30 days will do is build the bridge between where you are now and where he is, and on that bridge you will be transformed, not by circumstances, not by luck, not by the intervention of any force outside yourself. You will be transformed by the lawful operation of your own subconscious mind, directed by your own definite chief aim, powered by your own manufactured faith, expressed through the daily practice that you begin this morning, and do not stop until the man you have declared yourself to be is the man who looks back at you from the mirror without effort and without performance, because he has become the only man you know how to be. There is one more teaching I must give you before we move into the instruction for the night, and it is the teaching about the role of personal initiative in the operation of all the laws I have described. Personal initiative is the capacity of the man who acts without being told, who moves without waiting for external permission or external instruction, who recognizes in every day the opportunities for forward motion that the drifting man overlooks because he is waiting for someone else to define them. Carnegie told me that he would rather hire a man with half the technical knowledge and twice the personal initiative than the most technically qualified man in the world who waited to be directed before he would move. Personal initiative is the evidence that a man has truly internalized his definite chief aim, because the man who burns with a specific desire does not need to be instructed to act in its direction. The desire instructs him. The burning aim pulls him forward with more force than any external instruction could supply. The morning practice I have described to you, the practice of 30 days, is itself an act of personal initiative. No one is telling you to do it. No employer is requiring it. No social obligation demands it. The only force that can get you out of the comfortable warmth of sleep and into the deliberate practice of autosuggestion and definite declaration is the force of your own decided desire. And this is precisely why the practice builds personal initiative as a side effect of its daily execution. The man who disciplines himself to act on his own initiative in the one domain where no one is watching, in the silent privacy of his own morning, is the man who will act on his own initiative in every other domain as well. Because personal initiative is a habit, and cosmic habit force will deepen it until it becomes his fundamental orientation to every situation and every opportunity he encountered. Rockefeller said that the quality he most valued in a man was not intelligence and not education and not even experience. It was the quality he called self-propulsion, the capacity of a man to generate his own forward motion from the fuel of his own purpose, without requiring the engine of external pressure to keep him moving. This is another name for personal initiative, and another name for the burning desire that is the first condition of the law of transmutation. The self-propelled man does not wait, he moves. He moves imperfectly at first, because all movement begins in imperfection, but he moves, and the law of cosmic habit force deepens the movement into direction, and the direction into velocity, and the velocity into the unstoppable forward momentum of a man who has aligned every faculty and every habit with a single definite chief aim, and refused, with the persistence of a Lincoln or the endurance of an Edison, to be stopped by any force short of the complete achievement of what he has declared. Now the night is coming. As these words settle into you, as the day moves toward its closing, I want you to make a deliberate preparation for sleep. Sleep is not the end of the day's work. Sleep is the beginning of the subconscious mind's most focused, productive session. What you bring to sleep tonight, you bring to the building table of your subconscious mind for the hours of the night. And what is built in those hours will show itself in the days and the weeks and the months to come. So the preparation is not casual, it is intentional. It is the deliberate act of a man who understands that the night is not a suspension of progress, but its intensification. Let me be precise about what this preparation looks like in practice, because the precision matters, and because the difference between the man who uses the sleep hours effectively and the man who wastes them is entirely in the quality of what is brought to the threshold of sleep. In the last 30 minutes before you sleep, turn off every competing stimulus, not because silence is pleasant, though it is, but because the subconscious mind absorbs most powerfully in the absence of competing inputs. And if you bring to the threshold of sleep a mind still processing the noise of the day, the subconscious will spend its building hours sorting noise rather than building vision. Create the silence deliberately. Sit in it for a moment and feel its quality. It is not empty silence. It is the silence that is full of the invisible work that is about to happen. Then bring your definite chief aim into that silence, not as a list, not as a logical analysis of its components, as a living scene, a felt experience, a complete sensory vision of yourself already in possession of the thing you have declared. See it. Feel the emotion of it, the specific feeling that will be yours when what is invisible becomes visible. Hold that feeling as you move toward sleep. Let it be the last conscious experience of the day. Let the subconscious receive it at the moment of maximum receptivity, which is the moment of the passage into sleep, and then release the effort entirely. You have planted the seed for the night. Now let the roots extend. In the last hour before you sleep, do not bring the unresolved anxieties of the day. Do not review the list of what went wrong. Do not rehearse the fears. Do not spend the last waking moments feeding your subconscious with the material of limitation and dread. Instead, bring your definite chief aim. Bring the vivid, emotionally charged, precisely specified vision of the life you have decided to build. Bring it with the faith of a man who has studied the law and knows beyond doubt that what he has planted will grow. Bring it with the feeling of already possessing it, the feeling of gratitude for its existence, the feeling that arrives when you allow yourself to be the version of yourself who has already arrived and is looking back at this moment with full appreciation for how it all turned out. Speak your definite chief aim aloud in the quiet of the night. Speak it with conviction. Speak it as law. Then speak it again, more quietly, as the body begins its release towards sleep. Speak it one final time as a whisper that is not diminished by its quietness but deepened, a whisper that goes not to the room but to the subconscious directly, in that sacred space between waking and sleep where the door stands open the widest. Your definite chief aim is the thought you take into sleep tonight. That is the instruction. That is the deposit in the most powerful bank in the universe, the subconscious mind that will spend the night building from it without rest and without doubt and without any of the interference that the waking hours bring. Give it the clearest, most specific, most emotionally charged version of your definite aim that you can produce. Give it freely. Trust the building. Sleep. I am Napoleon Hill, and I have given you the law, not as philosophy, not as comfort, as the precise operational instructions for the transformation of a man from whatever he is now to whatever he has the courage to declare himself to be. The law is old. It was operating before any of us gave it a name. It will operate after every name we have given it has been forgotten. It is the law of mind and its dominion over matter. It is the law of thought as the first cause. It is the law of faith as manufactured certainty. It is the law of the subconscious as the builder of all conditions. It is the law of persistence as the irresistible force that no obstacle can ultimately withstand. It is the law of the extra mile and the law of cosmic habit force and the law of transmutation. These laws are yours. They have always been yours. They were waiting for you to claim them. The 30 days begin tomorrow morning. No, they begin this morning. They begin with the next breath you take after these words have finished their journey from your ears into the deepest architecture of your understanding. They begin with the decision, the real decision, the burning of the boats decision, to be the man your future self wrote you that letter about. The man who did not drift, the man who decided, the man who planted and persisted through the silent season and arrived at the harvest. That man is you. He has always been you. The law has been waiting for you to say so. Now speak these 7 commands. Speak them as the declaration of identity that they are. Speak them as law. Feel them as truth. Let them complete the construction that has been begun in this night. I am the architect of my own circumstances, and I accept full responsibility for every condition of my life from this moment forward. I hold in my mind a definite chief aim so precisely defined that my subconscious receives it as instruction and builds toward it without hesitation or confusion. I manufacture faith daily through the practice of autosuggestion, and I refuse to allow fear or doubt to take permanent residence in the mind I have decided to govern. I render service beyond what is required, and I do so without resentment and without calculation, because I understand that the law of compensation cannot fail, and that my extra-mile investment is the surest investment available to me. I have dissolved the 6 ghosts of fear. I am not afraid of poverty, of criticism, of ill health, of the loss of love, of old age, or of death. I am free of these shadows, and I move forward in the open light of my decided purpose. I use the law of cosmic habit force in my favor. What I repeat becomes my identity, and what I declare my identity to be, I repeat. The man I am declaring myself to be tonight is the man I am building through every morning practice and every night instruction until he is the only man the mirror can show me. I trust the law. I have planted. I persist. The invisible work is building the visible result. I do not dig up the seed. I do not demand immediate evidence. I trust the law with the certainty of a man who has examined the evidence of every great life in history and found in all of them the same unmistakable operation of the same unmistakable law. These 7 declarations are not words spoken into empty air. They are instructions delivered to the most powerful building force in the known universe, your own subconscious mind, backed by the emotional certainty of a man who has decided and whose decision is final. The law has received them. The building has begun. The harvest is coming. Go now and sleep. And as you sleep, know that the invisible world is already arranging itself around the shape of what you have declared. The morning you wake to will be the first morning of the man you are becoming. And 30 mornings from now, 60 mornings, 90 mornings from now, you will be unrecognizable. Not to the world, to yourself. Because the man who knows the law, who applies it faithfully, who persists through the silent season without digging up the seed, that man does not merely improve, he transforms. He arrives one morning as someone entirely new, and on that morning he will remember this night and understand that it was not ordinary. Nothing that begins with a decision ever is.